right, we should be recording now. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining the Research Technology and Development TIG's webinar for today. On the screen right now, we just have a couple of links for you if you want to take a look at this slide. You can use the QR code in the corner, and then that'll give you access to links to a number of our TIG sites. Definitely, if you're not a regular member of the TIG already connected to us, you should feel free to participate. You can join AEA, but you can also engage with us even if you're not an AEA member yet. But one of the things that we do on a regular basis, if we can, is have this webinar series. We're very excited to have our speaker today. But before I jump into today's webinar, I do want to point out that we have already scheduled 2 more webinars coming up on May 15th. That's a Wednesday at noon. Bhavin Sampat, who's a professor at Arizona State University, is going to be talking about evaluating benefits from publicly funded research using patent data. Bhavin's been working with patent data for quite some time, has a lot of expertise, and wants to talk about data and how to use those patent data in particular for doing evaluation, and of course concerns and limitations. So that should be a good one. Mark your calendar and join us next month. And then June 20th, I think, is a Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern. Chris Belter, who has joined us today, hi Chris, is going to be talking to us about a really hot topic, generative AI, and some of the work that he's been doing. Chris is always doing interesting things and pushing us as a community, so we're happy to have Chris joining us for that. So mark your calendars for that. We'll send out reminders and links to the Zoom links for those, but just so you're aware, those are coming. Great. Does anybody have any questions while I switch over to our other slides? All right, give me 1 second. All right, so am I sharing my screen with the NCI slide? Does that look good? Okay, great. Actually, hold on 1 second. There we go. Should be just sharing the PowerPoint at this point. All right, well, welcome everyone. We are very excited to have today's presentation from, give me 1 second. From Corinne Bollinger-Espute, who is a health science administrator and program director in the cancer training branch at the National Cancer Institute's Center for Cancer Training. She's responsible for managing a grants portfolio of training and career development awards, and it has a strong affinity for training, mentoring, and teaching, and enjoys her work with the next generation of cancer researchers. She's had a long career in intramural science at the NIH, co-authoring a number of research papers, presenting at national meetings and training students and postdocs, as well as teaching graduate courses. So we're very excited to welcome her to present today on the K99 R00 program, affectionately known as the kangaroos, at least it was back in the day. And so we're happy to turn it over to Corinne. Thank you, Corinne, and please take it away.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you all for joining me today. I appreciate the invitation to speak. as Josh said, I am in the Center for Cancer Training in the Cancer Training Branch at the National Cancer Institute, and I'm going to talk to you today about a career development award, the analysis of a career development award of the Pathway to Independence Award, or K99 R00. Next slide, please. So today's talk will have a short overview of the mechanism of the K99 R00, how and why we performed this study, the results we obtained from our evaluation, some of the challenges that we've faced, as well as how we address them, how this analysis is being used by our leadership, and some of the additional lessons that we've learned along the way. Next slide, please. So the Pathway to Independence Award, or K99 award, has three different notices for that our awardees can, or our applicants can apply to. They are one for clinical trials, one that allows for human subjects, and one that does not allow for clinical trials. The objective of the award is to help outstanding postdoctoral researchers complete a needed mentored career development, and then transition in a timely manner to an independent tenure track or equivalent faculty position, and then foster the development of a creative independent research program that will allow for competitive subsequent independent funding. We allow both US and non-US citizens who are training at domestic institutions. Current trainees must have less than 4 years of postdoctoral training. MDs who have clinical training, their clinical training does not count towards this 4 years of eligibility, and applicants cannot have held an independent faculty or tenure track position. We accept applications in all areas of cancer research. Next slide, please. To show you an illustration of this award, it has two different phases. The initial mentored phase is from 1 to 2 years. It allows for $100,000 a year in salary support and $30,000 a year in research support. After this phase, the awardees apply and obtain a tenure track assistant professor or equivalent position, and then transition into their independent phase called the R00 phase, which allows for up to 3 years of support, which has a total support cost of $249,000 per year. Next slide, please. So this slide represents the historical data of applications, awards, and success rates for the NCI K99 R00 award. At its inception, eligibility allowed for up to 5 years of postdoctoral research experience for qualifying applicants. In 2014, the eligibility was reduced to 4 years, with the goal of further accelerating the time to research independence for these early stage or ESI investigators. The K99 R00 has quickly become one of the NCI's most popular career development funding opportunities, averaging 43% of all competing K applications and 35% of all competing K awards from fiscal year 2018 through 2022. Next slide, please. So the first question we wanted to ask was, does the K99 facilitate a timely transition to independence? To determine this, we use the measurement of an RPG, or research project grant submission. RPGs are awards such as R01s and R21s that are submitted at the independent career stage, such as early stage investigators. Typically, if you're not independent, institutions do not allow you to submit RPG grants. Next slide, please. As an illustration, you get your PhD, you complete your postdoc, and then you enter your independent lab. That's when you typically would submit an R01 or R01 equivalent RPG grant. An R01 equivalent is a grant that's not necessarily an R01 or an RPG. It's a grant that has an equivalent to an R01, meaning it has at least $150,000 in support for at least 3 years and is peer reviewed. Next slide, please. Here we analyzed whether our study group, the K99 R00, and a comparison group, F32 applicants, submitted and received subsequent NIH research project grants, RPGs, or R01 equivalent, called R01 grants. The study group, NCI R01, our NCI K99 R00 awardees from fiscal years 2007 through 2017, were compared against F32 awardees from 2005 to 2015. The NCI Ruth L. Kirstein NRSA for individual postdoc fellows F32 awards support promising postdoctoral applicants who have the potential to become productive and successful independent cancer research investigators. This is not a transition award and does not have a second part like the R00 part of the transition award. However, it's very similar in that it supports promising postdoctoral researchers. So since this award, the F32, is typically applied for earlier in the postdoctoral phase than the K99, we accounted for this by looking at a cohort that was a couple years earlier in our grouping, hence the 2005 to 2015, as opposed to the 2007 to 2017 cohort for the K99 R00s. Data for the study in comparison cohorts was extracted from the NIH Information for Management, Planning and Analysis and Coordination 2, or IMPACT-2 database. The annual success rate was calculated as the percentage of reviewed grant applications that were awarded. Applications having more than one submission for the same project in the same fiscal year were only counted one time. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry. I meant to say that, as you can see, the success rate for the K99 of RPGs and R01 applications is quite high compared to the F32s. Next slide, please. We also compared our K99 awardees against two other K99 application groups, and these are defined as the K99 discussed and the K99 ND, or not discussed, groups. These are applicants who applied for the K99 and under the discussed groups received scores but were not funded, and the K99 not discussed groups applied but were not discussed. And as you can see, again, the K99 were the most successful in application for both RPG and R01 equivalents. Next slide. The next question we wanted to ask was, does the K99 R00 lead to the development, in addition, we wanted to examine the time in years between the applicant's PhD graduation and submission or award of their first RPG or R01 equivalent grant application. Data from applicants without a PhD degrees, for example, applicants with an MD degree, account for only about 0.1% of total applicants. And these were excluded from the analysis because the candidates with an MD degree have a different career development timeline than candidates with PhD degrees. Shown here for the K99 R00 study and the F32 component group, with the F32 awardees having a slightly less time to independence. This would make sense because they don't have the second phase, the R00 phase, so they would transition slightly sooner. Okay. Next slide, please. We did this same time to independence study with the other two control groups, the K99 discussed and the K99 not discussed. And you see a similar time for K99 and K99 discussed, but you see a slightly longer time to independence for the K99 not discussed groups for both RPG and for the R01 equivalents. Next slide, please. Now, the next question we wanted to ask was, does the K99 R00 lead to the development of an independent research program that will be competitive for subsequent independent funding? And to measure this, we looked at R01 e-submission award, time to first R01E, and continuous funding. Next slide, please. Securing independent funding is a major hurdle for any independent ESIs and is a requirement to establish a productive laboratory. The R01 and equivalent research grants are often seen as a foundation for a productive research career. We therefore analyzed if NCI K99 awardees who obtained their K99 award between fiscal years 2007 and 2017 secured R01 equivalent support by the end of fiscal year 2022 and compared these results to our control groups. In this slide, we compared them to the F32s. You can see that the K99 awardees had the highest likelihood of obtaining at least one R01 equivalent award during the analysis period was 65.6%, and the F32 awardees had only 20.7%. So again, this is a percentage of the applications. The award received are a percentage of the applications. Next slide, please. As shown here, we performed the analysis against the other K99 award application groups. Again, 65.6% for the K99 awardees versus 32.4% for the K99 discussed group and 18.6% for the K99 not discussed group. Next slide, please. Is an illustration of all four groups together. And you will see, interestingly, that the F32 group has a higher percentage than the K99 not discussed group. Okay. While the K99 award enhanced the likelihood of PIs securing R01 equivalent support, it had no impact on time to obtain the first R01 or equivalent award. K99 awardees needed on average 10 years between obtaining their PhDs and their first R01 equivalent award. PIs in the control groups needed similar time with 10 years for K99 discussed and F32 awardees and 11 years for K99 not discussed. Nothing really surprising as far as we were concerned. Our results suggest that the K99 award enhanced the likelihood of PIs to secure initial R01 equivalent support. Based on continuous research support, because continuous research support is required to maintain a productive research program, we analyzed if the K99 award affected the PI's ability to secure additional R01 equivalent funding. For this study, we evaluated the total number of R01 equivalent awards counted by distinct base project that the PIs received within 7 years of their first R01 equivalent award. K99 awardees secured on average. Our results suggest
Am I a slide behind you? Sorry.
yeah, that's okay. One more slide, please.
Okay, there we go.
Our result, our K99 awardees secured on average 2.5 R01 equivalent awards, including the initial R01 equivalent award, while K99 discussed, all other F32s had on average 2, and all others, K99, F32 awards were about 1.9, and all other new investigators were right around 2. So there was a little bit of a difference between the number of R01 equivalent awards for K99 and for F32 awardees versus new investigators. Next slide, please.
Can I just double check? So I'm following. So that is within, why can't I go backwards? Um, so you're actually looking, so it's 2 awards within
7
7.
years of the, right,
Okay. Because most are 5 years, like 5 years for the first one, and then they've got like a 2-year buffer to submit the second one.
right.
Okay, got it. And so during that follow-up period, you're seeing about 2.5 awards for the K99 folks, and then for F32s or other new investigators, about 2.
Yeah, so it's within 7 years of their first. We give them the 7-year period after their first award.
Okay. And that doesn't mean the R00, right? This is
No, it does not include the R00.
got it. Got it. Got it. Okay, great. Thanks. I'll
Mhm.
move you now to, here you go.
So to summarize, overall, the NCI K99 R00 program appears to meet the goals of the K99 R00 Career Development Award and is an important component of the NCI's work to develop and support the next generation of independent cancer researchers. However, neither the K99 R00 nor other NIH Career Development Awards, nor the NRSA fellowships are required to become a successful independent early stage NCI investigator with substantial NIH funding. While the NCI K99 R00 can enhance the likelihood of postdoctoral researchers to transition to research independence and secure R01 or equivalent funding, K99 R00 support is not a prerequisite to become a successful investigator, nor does it accelerate the time to research independence. Our results suggest that the NCI K99 R00 mechanism is an important program for retaining postdoctoral researchers in the field of cancer research. Next slide, please. So here's where I'd like to switch gears a little and talk about the actual preparation and data analysis part of the project. So we faced several challenges to our project, and I have them listed here. So we met as a working group initially to decide on timeframes, what questions to ask, what data we needed. The tools we had on hand were not sufficient to obtain the data we needed. We knew that we would need to work with a collaborator who could access the data that we could not. But first we had to pull an initial sampling of data so that we could look and see if what we wanted to do was feasible. So we did pull from Impact2 using a tool called QVR. It's a search engine. And what we are able to use from Impact2 is more of a shadow copy of Impact2. It's not a full copy of it. So it's fairly limited and it's almost a manual function. And if something's embedded, we really can't access it. It would be a very, very manual deep dive to try and get at things. So we knew that we would only really be able to access these things through a collaboration. So once we determined that what we wanted to do was feasible, we contacted our collaborators at CSR and we got together and met with them, proposed our project and ideas, and we worked together to develop a evaluation plan. So we did that and we got everything together. The issue with that was that everything was decided ahead of time. And once we requested what we wanted, there was no adjustments. So we said, hey, we want to do this. They said, great, we'll do it. But that was it. It was one shot and there was no, do you want to try this or it was, here's your data. And so they did a wonderful job, fantastic job, but we've got this huge amount of data and that data then has to be further evaluated, mined, filtered to get at the questions that we want to ask. So all in all, this project took over a year from concept to publication. So, next slide, please. About the data in general, as I mentioned, we initially pulled test data through Impact2 using the QVR tool. Our collaborators had the tools necessary to speak directly to Impact2, so they were able to give a much more detailed and just overall comprehensive amount of data. They provided 4 large data sets that we were able to then mine and filter out the information we wanted. Really interesting about our data is that it is 100% of the study population of the experimental study, and it's a reflection of reality. So there is no error. You'll notice there's no p-value in any of our data. So it's very interesting in that regard. Okay. Next slide, please. So based on the information, how is it being used by our leadership? Well, the program evaluation is being done based on the information that was obtained through the study. So one of the real pain points for our applicants has always been this eligibility timeframe. 4 years is very difficult for getting publications and for getting enough data. And so now that extension is being proposed to change to 6 years. And that's really wonderful. It's going to be a great change if it's put into place for many, many of our potential applicants. And also there's the proposed sunsetting of another program that doesn't have the success of this program, which allows for a change in the allocation of resources, monies, and staff to really streamline how we work programmatically. And this also has brought about the need for review of additional mechanisms, specifically the Mentored Clinical Scientist Research Career Development Award, the K08 Award, which we are currently doing right now. And also we are, which I found very interesting, looking at the actual responses from the survey that went with this analysis so that we have actual meaningful context to apply to the data. Okay. Next slide, please. So some of the additional lessons that I think were learned from this, that working in collaboration with others who bring their expertise really helped bring a comprehensive approach to not only the analysis of the data, but just a much better all around paper and, you know, well thought out approach to everything. We learned that the questions we asked determined how we looked at the data itself, and that the data can be used to provide different interpretations of the results. For example, we learned the success rates of women versus men scientists, applicants and awards by race, and institutional dynamics. Although those weren't the initial questions we were asking, all of that information was in the data. And I'm going to show those in the next couple of slides as some really interesting things that we found out. Next slide, please. As I said, now the numbers aren't the same in terms of applicants. However, the success rates are almost the same. So whereas we do have to work on the numbers of applicants that we get for females, their success rate is wonderful, right? 36% apply, 35% are successful. That's a great success rate. So that's a really great result to see. Next slide, please. And also by race, whereas we really need to increase the numbers of racial applicants that we get. We see that what we do have by race, they are successful. So we see that this award works for everybody, and that's a great result. Next slide, please. One other thing that we see is this award allows for mobility of K99 awardees. K99 awardees are actually the most flexible or have the highest mobility of all our awardees. And we kind of term this a golden ticket. They can kind of choose or have the most ability to go where they want to go in terms of their training and their positions for their R00 phase. And they tend to go, they are the group that goes from the institutions with the lower resources to the higher resources the most. And we gauge resources, our measurement of resources is the number of R01s. That's just the measurement we use in this case. And all of that is additional information that we got through this data, which was, I thought, really an interesting thing to find out. Next slide, please. So just some of the takeaways from the analysis on the K99 is that the NCI K99 facilitates a successful transition of postdoctoral scholars to research independence in the academic setting. The 4-year eligibility limit is a major hurdle for some applicants. The R00, K99 R00 mechanism is successful for applicants in all racial groups, as well as men and women scientists. The award provides flexibility for applicants to move to institutions of their choosing, as I said, a golden ticket. And I want to make clear that all our conclusions are specific for the NCI K99 R00 mechanism. Next slide. And this is my best slide. This is a collaborative effort, and I can't stress that enough. Fabulous working group. Everybody in here was amazing to work with. Naz is on the call today, so big shout out to her. She works tirelessly all the time. And also to Michael Schmidt, who is amazing with data, and his slides are all over this talk. So he can just do amazing things with data, and I can't thank him enough either for all that he did. So thank you all for your time.
Great. Thanks, Corinne. That was excellent. Some really interesting findings. I jotted down a bunch of questions, but I want to make sure others have a chance to ask any if they have any, or if there's any other comments or other studies that folks are aware of that Corinne and Nas can take a look at as well. So if you feel free to come off mute, raise your hand using the gestures so we know you're interested in asking a question. Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure where I would begin. A lot of really interesting questions. Couple ones that might be more obvious. The first one is, did you have any opportunity to look at non-NCI K99s, or have other ICs looked to see if they're observing the same thing, or if it's specific for NCI folks? And then the other question is, what about taking some of those early, not all of the K99 awardees, but starting with the early career and then looking the earliest years, and then looking at even longer term to see, do they stay in cancer research? Do they stay in those careers? I know it's not going to be everyone, so it's a subset, but looking at some of those earliest ones to see progression through, for example, at least back in the day when we did some work with career outcomes, we were able to use some data that NIH had from the AAMC related to faculty positions. And so you could look at, I think it was called the faculty roster, and you could look at some of the career progression. Maybe those data don't exist anymore because I'm dating myself. This was like 10 years ago or more. Um, but there might be other interesting markers of career progression and independence beyond just the applications and awards, which are obviously really important ones. So sorry, I'm throwing a lot of questions out there because I like this kind of study.
Yeah. So there was a study, Steve Korn did a K99 study. So I know that's out there. He did not want, it was a slightly different result, obviously, than ours. As far as we did not look, Naz, please chime in with me on this. As far as trajectory, we didn't look at where they are now.
Right. We used the second R01 or equivalent submission as a proxy measure of
Right.
basically staying in academia.
Right.
Right. So there was another paper published by actually the center that we collaborated with. Melissa Antman is the first author, and they showed some really striking data about this kind of cliff, showing a cliff where we have a lot of people who submit their first R01 are awarded the first R01, and then the percentages that actually go on to receive a second R01 are strikingly low. So we thought that based on that information, it might be a good measure to indicate, whether they're staying in academia. I think that data, you mentioned AAMC, I think that's still out there. We didn't reach out. That's actually an interesting, that's something we could consider in the future and pursuing. But Corinne, you might want to talk a little bit about the interviews too. I don't know, if you touched on that in your slides, but I think that's a really interesting piece, and it adds another kind of element to the data.
Yeah, so we did reach out to our applicants. I mentioned it briefly that we did have survey questions as to why did you apply? Did you apply? Why did you apply? Did it help you achieve independence? And then some free text about would you recommend your trainees apply, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that was very helpful in adding context to why some of them stayed in academia and the benefits. And some of it was very interesting, as I felt that because, I wasn't qualified, or that I didn't have enough data, or my mentor didn't suggest it. So it gave us a lot of perspective about timeframes, about eligibility, about not enough data. And we know also from when we talked to our prospective applicants along the same lines. But yes, we did do a survey, and where we reached out with a couple initial questions and then offered, did they want to do a subsequent follow-up phone survey? And it's the initial questions that we formed that make all the difference, I think. So if anybody has any specific questions about that, we did do those.
I was curious, oh, go ahead, Gavin.
Sorry, I was going to say it's not a specific question on that, but sort of follows on a little bit from that and from Josh's comment. And thank you very much for the talk, by the way, as well. It was really interesting and really nice to see. I love seeing these, and I like to see how different people do them. But I think here you've got this sort of the application and success at the R01 level as being sort of the proxy, it's both a real indication of, they are continuing in academia, they are successful, that's a real thing. but also kind of as a proxy for this program is being successful because it's like at the end of it, people are able to go and do that. And I wonder if you've thought about extending, and so this is the bit where you go, that's an interesting idea, and you don't have to do it, but looking at maybe some of the outputs that people do, the actual work itself that they're producing, because one possibility might be that, you know, if you are successful in navigating into this area and then picking up about some internal resources, you might be more successful at getting the grant because you're more successful at getting grants, which is strongly aligned with this sort of the career success. But it would be really interesting if that was also true, that they were, you know, doing better, which is always a problematic word to define, but better research, you know, as they go into this and then out of it, they're better researchers and doing better research. You're either getting better people coming in, or you're adding that extra value to their lifelong career rather than helping them get that, just that first step. I don't know if you've thought about that. That goes to the timelines as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, you mean in terms of the type of science they're doing?
Yeah, so are they doing impactful, in this case, cancer-focused research? You know, I think we should look beyond bibliometrics, but if we were just to do that, you know, are they producing more highly cited papers? If we were just to take it on that one metric, and I think we should look at several, but you know, rather than just looking at they're successful at getting the grant, look at who it is that's applying, how they look relative to other people, and are they getting sort of better? As I say, I mean it more multifaceted than that, but you know, just to pick one thing to.
So is that, I mean, I would assume that's part of the R01 review though, right?
Yes, but as I say, that just to try and disentangle, like I'm good at I'm good at doing tests versus I know stuff. It's that kind of thing that, you know, they've applied for this NIH funding. They've got like they have a sense as to how to actually go about applying for NIH funding. So they might have like an inside track with this kind of one, which again, you know, that's all part of getting a career. So, you know, that's not like it's in a legitimate thing or a different thing, but it would just be really interesting to know if in addition, this support is helping them be better researchers.
It could be
somewhere.
interesting because, I mean, a lot of the K99 awardees have very high impact papers, you know, in their application. And so it could be interesting to see, are they continuing with that trend in terms of high impact papers, you know, looking at impact factor or other types of indices that, you know, like RCR or something like that. But we're also really interested in areas of research. Most of our K99 applicants are in areas of fundamental cancer biology. And we, you know, we actually have another version of the K99 award. I don't know if Corinne mentioned it. It's the we call it the early K99. So the difference is that there's a 2-year eligibility window. So you can't have more than 2 years of postdoc research experience. And one of the reasons why we started that program is to encourage people who tend to do shorter postdocs. So you know, cancer research is very broad, and within cancer research, we have a lot of epidemiology, cancer prevention, cancer control, population science. Those individuals often transition very quickly into faculty, not necessarily tenure track position, but you know, so we heard input from the community and from NCI colleagues that these individuals needed to be supported in some way as they transition to their independent careers. And in addition, data scientists too, they tend to do shorter postdocs. So in that award, it's a newer award. So we're hoping to do a similar kind of analysis in the future. but the areas of science are really interesting to us as well, and what we're supporting. So it might be interesting to see, whether they're continuing in the same areas of research or not as they go on with their research programs.
Yeah, one of the other questions I had was also kind of early on, you were talking about the F-32s and comparing those to the K99s, and I wondered if there were are there folks who had both? Or maybe F-31s, which are the I think grad student fellowship.
They're undergrad. So
Yeah.
you can't have an F-32 and a K99.
Okay. Okay. We used to think about with like take your K99 population and then look at kind of that subset or that group, what kinds of career milestones did they have before that might suggest that, they're on a track to become K99s and to continue. That's one idea. I think the other question might be, no, I've forgotten it. Oh, I can mute myself and give other folks an opportunity to ask something.
So we can pull that data. But so you're talking about a long-term progression from a fellowship to another award.
Yeah. Now I'm remembering too. So you mentioned the looking at the K99 phase and then the R00 phase. That's really interesting. So I think what you said was that there seems to be sort of a flow from institutions that are maybe less NIH resourced, like they have fewer NIH grants, to institutions that tend to have more. Is
So
that what you were
this
saying?
is kind of like we call it a golden ticket,
Right.
meaning they have more choices. They kind of get more, I don't want to say more offers, but they kind of get to go to the institution of their choice
Right.
in more cases.
Because they're bringing their own funding, basically, right? And so that's, yeah.
But they have to have specific wording that their job offer is not contingent upon this R00.
Hmm.
So, but I mean, I can't tell you the number of them that get the job they want, their dream jobs.
Yeah.
So, and we have the data that shows they go to these really great institutions.
Yeah. No,
But also, when we
it's
started
a
a really great
problem.
institution.
It's a tough problem because I was just thinking about the corn paper. So what NINDS really wanted to do with their analysis was to kind of debunk the myth that you must have a K99 R00 award to be able to get a faculty position. And they looked specifically in areas of neuroscience and demonstrated that indeed it wasn't, it's not a requirement. But, in reality, institutions need some metrics, right, in order to filter out certain applicants and to be able to get to a reasonable number. And sometimes some institutions use funding as that measure, I think that's just the reality of it. So I know it's interesting because there's certainly some groups at NIH who think that we should get rid of the K99 altogether, and that it's just not, it's creating an unfair kind of playing field. I don't know. I think based on our analysis, we would disagree. We think that it's a vehicle that can help people. And if we can actually offer more of these awards, then perhaps it could be even more impactful. So I guess you could look at it different ways.
And
you know how many reapply?
How many, I'm sorry, how many
So
reapply?
how many reapply? Do you know anything about this non-discussed group? Do they reapply for grants? I'm getting back to Gavin and Josh's comments on the trajectory, because I think that's a lot of that's what caught my interest in your analysis, which is that it's about how do you build on several layers of career grants. I think it was a wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed reading the paper as well. But these trajectories about how do non-discussed applicants fare, because there was a fairly large share of them who actually ended up getting an R01 eventually. So the question is whether it breaks them or whether it makes them stronger. So who comes out better in the other end? There's a lot of discussion about how do you bundle grants. Is it good to have a lot of small grants? Is it good to fight a lot and meet resistance? Then you do better applications, you do better research. It's very hard to figure out what's the right way.
So that population specifically did not get, the ND group did not get a K99. Okay, because that's where they were in the ND group. But I can tell you as a K99 PD that I often get a resubmission or a new once you've resubmitted, you have to do a new submission if you end up being able to do it a third time. And they will get funded.
Yeah.
There are some that get funded on resubmission or on a new submission, and they go on to do great things. I mean, I think it's perseverance for whether or not you get a K99 or whether or not you get small grants. It's perseverance. It's how badly do you want it, and how badly, I mean, just it's who you are. So
you see that those that reapply, they have a higher success rate.
I wouldn't say higher success rate.
No,
I wouldn't say that. I think it's so for us, it's, as far as funding, it's numbers of applications, how the applications are scored, how how many other applications there are, it's budget, it's a whole bunch of things that go into funding. And remember, when something is discussed, it could be one small step away from being funded, and it could be a large step away from being funded in any given fiscal year. So a discussed application could be very, very close to a funded one, or it could be a little further away from a funded one. So
yeah, to that point, we used to do where we would take the slice that were right at the payoff, the pay line, the cutoff for the pay line, and you would take a subset and compare. So you're not comparing kind of the highest scored one and the lowest scored one for that round. You may not have enough total applicants to do that, but that might be one thing you could think about to compare those that say were just a few points away in the score and were funded versus those that weren't, as opposed to comparing all funded and unfunded.
That could be interesting potentially for our current analysis for the K08. Interestingly, that's the K08s for clinical scholars. The review of the applications, the scores are spread quite differently for K08 versus K99. For K99, we see quite a nice spread of the scores, but for K08, there's more of a, weighted towards like the very good scores. So that might be really interesting, actually, approach. Thanks for that thought. Yeah.
Great. Well, we're close to time. Any final questions or comments anybody wants to get out there?
Oh, lots of good questions and good answers.
Henrik is a regular audience member here. He's an evaluator at the Novo Nordisk Foundation over in Denmark. They do a lot of funding, and they regular participant in the community. Glad you could make it, Henrik.
Yeah, sure. Glad to be here, and hopefully see you all in the fall.
Sunny Portland.
Yeah.
Yeah, sunny.
All right, great. Well, thanks again, Corinne. Nas, it was great to have you here as
Thanks for
well.
doing slides for me.
Yeah, no worries. We'll let you know when the recording is available if you want to share it within the NIH community for folks who you think might be interested, and we'll definitely advertise it through our usual channels. And as you're doing more evaluations, keep us in mind either for the annual meeting or for the webinar series. Always looking for folks to share what they're doing. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for reaching
Thanks,
out.
everybody.
Thank you very much.
Take
Bye,
care.
everyone.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.